The next day, Jiang left his apartment and went to a forest. Then he took out a map, held it with both hands, and while looking at it, began to question which way was the right one. He wasn't sure if he had gotten lost again. At that moment, someone shouted loudly for help. Jiang, who was trying to find the way, started looking back and with a confused look began to wonder who was shouting. Behind him there was a giant tree. On the ground beside it there was a sword. At the top of the tree, there was a man with white hair holding onto a branch. He was asking for help because he was afraid of heights. Jiang turned around, started looking up, and upon seeing the man, he remained silently thinking. He decided to help him. He extended his hand towards him and used the ability called Growth of All Things Vine. By doing this, several branches emerged from the ground and began to advance towards the man. Just before he let go of the trunk and fell from the tree, the branches wrapped around his body, preventing him from. Several seconds later, the man finally landed on the ground. He placed both hands and both knees on the ground, and while panting heavily he explained to Jiang that he had been quite scared. He just wanted to save a bird's nest. He had thought that nest didn't seem high up, but upon climbing realized it was really very high. Jiang approached him, started looking at him, and while a drop of sweat was falling from his cheek, remained somewhat confused seeing that the man was afraid of heights yet still decided to climb the tree to save a bird's nest. He didn't know if this man was an idiot. The man stood up. He was an older man. He extended his hand towards Jiang and with a pleasant look thanked him for saving him and also asked what he wanted in return. Jiang, who was lost, asked the man if he knew how to get to the Tanjiao camp. The man turned his back on Jiang, and as he was walking away from him, closed his eyes and with a smile began to ask him to follow since he too was going to the Tanjiao camp because he had a task there. He put his hand behind his head, thanked him and decided to follow him. Jiang started to follow the man, extended his hand towards him and decided to ask a bit about him. He asked him if he was also a job changer. He was somewhat confused since the man carried his sword behind his back, instead of storing it in the system inventory. He started walking in front of Jiang and explained that he actually wasn't a job changer, but just an enthusiast who liked practicing with the sword. He turned his head towards Jiang, started looking him in the eyes and with a cheerful smile, explained that when he was young, he didn't have the talent and after failing to change job, he fought and struggled for almost 10 years and still wasn't even able to afford buying a bathroom in the city. At that moment he was completely desperate and ran to the mountains, found a small abandoned cabin, climbed on top of a table, and prepared to hang himself, but when he looked to one side he saw a sword. Seeing this sword, the will to continue living returned in him. Since then, he began practicing with the sword every day on the mountain. Practiced drawing the sword for 20 years and fencing for 30 years, and then suddenly he had a revelation. He asked Jiang if it didn't seem incredible. Jiang, who was somewhat confused, responded that it was certainly something incredible. The man grabbed the sword with his hand, started looking at the ground and asked Jiang if he wanted to learn how to handle the sword. He knew a special move. Just before he could say the name of the special move, Jiang interrupted him and refused. Upon hearing this, he put away the sword, closed his eyes and with a pleasant smile thought that Jiang was a bit impatient. He decided to wait for the moment when Jiang would want to learn how to handle the sword. Jiang started looking at the sky and upon seeing what had appeared, he couldn't help but be somewhat surprised. With a cheerful look, he asked the man to look and also asked him if that wasn't the Tanjiao camp. But to everyone's surprise, the man disappeared. Jiang started looking around and noticing that the man was not there. He became somewhat confused and began to wonder where the man was. He also thought that this old man was too strange. At the same time in Tanjiao camp, several helicopters started flying in the sky. At the entrance, there was a receptionist and in front of the desk there was a huge line of people. He asked all geniuses who were going to enter the camp to first come and line up for registration. Each one would receive an identification bracelet which could not be removed unless one was eliminated. A man with black hair began to approach the entrance. A while later it was Jiang's turn from Chu City. He received the identification bracelet and started putting it on his wrist. In this camp, Mu Hankyu and Luo Sando were also present. They brought their hands to their chests, started looking at Jiang with a loving gaze, and couldn't help but start blushing upon seeing that he had also come to the camp. For Mu Hangyu, he was her master, and for Luo Sando, he was her benefactor. Jiang couldn't help but feel somewhat confused as he didn't know what was happening. Being a benefactor was fine for him, but being her master wasn't. They too started to fight among themselves. With an aggressive look they began to insult each other. Luo Sando did not know why Mu Hangyu was calling Jiang love. She had advised her many times to read fewer romance novels so that she would not fantasize senselessly like men. Mu Hangyu responded that she was right. Now she really knew what true love was. According to her, Luo Sando was nothing. While the two of them were fighting, little Nine manifested herself. She took out a piece of watermelon, closed her eyes, and while she was eating it, explained to Jiang that she was enjoying watching the two of them fight. Jiang remained silent as this information was overwhelming for him. Luo Sando began pointing at her with her finger and asked why she was so close to Jiang without any reason. Mu Hangyu approached him, grabbed his arm, started mocking Luo Sando, and asked her to stop being so narcissistic since she wasn't following him. According to her, Jiang had the final say. Jiang did not say a single word. Upon seeing this, Luo Sando began to point at her with her finger, and with a mocking smile told her that she had said this a long time ago, and now it had come true. Mu Hangyu started touching the tips of her fingers. She began to look at the ground and explained to her that Jiang was very handsome. Luo Sando approached her, put a hand on her shoulder, closed her eyes, and while laughing asked her if they were good friends again now. Mu Hangyu started to look at her and explained that she felt they were now both better friends and rivals in love. They could only be considered friend-enemies. Seeing this, Jiang began to sweat and thought that girls were very strange. At that moment, a loud bang was heard not far from them. Everyone started looking towards the direction of the bang and saw a curtain of smoke. As the curtain of smoke was disappearing, Jiang began to wonder what was happening. Luo Sando started to look a little more closely and realized that someone was fighting. The same man we saw at the entrance of the camp appeared. He started rolling up his sleeves, clenched his teeth tightly, and with an aggressive look, began to ask who was fighting. Not everyone had entered the camp yet, and someone was already fighting. He didn't know if this person was looking for death. Jiang, who was behind him, started staring at him intently and realized that he was the patrol instructor. He didn't know if the instructors had third-level strength. The instructor approached the place of the fight, but someone gave him a strong punch in the stomach, causing his body to be thrown backward. Seeing this, Jiang couldn't help but stay in shock. The instructor's body was thrown backward and fell to the ground. He put his hand on his chest, opened his mouth, and while bleeding, gave the order to the others to notify the superiors, as this was getting out of hand. Luo Sando was left speechless upon seeing that a third-level master had been thrown into the air in a second. With a surprised look, she began to wonder who had hit the instructor. With a serious look, Mu Hangyu revealed to her that they were the standouts from Jiangnan's war zone. A woman with red eyes, who was wearing assassin clothes, appeared. She put her hand on her hip, started staring at the instructor, and remained silent. Her name was Tang Ying. She was an assassin. Her strength was extremely terrifying. She was the youngest assassin of Tianjilu. It was said that recently she had assassinated a great level 4 master in secure country. Another man who had red hair appeared, his body surrounded by powerful energy. He began to look at him and couldn't help but start smiling. His name was Bai Feng, and he was known as the Little God of Death. He was a disciple of the chief commander of the East Sea Defense Line. He was the brightest and most promising seed in the military district but had psychological problems. He tended to lose control easily and turn into a demon. Another blue-haired man appeared. He extended the sword into the sky, began to stare at Jiang, and started to smile. His name was Zhao Baiheng. His grandfather was one of the 7 guardians of Great Xia. He had the profession of Blue Lotus Immortal Swordsman, comparable to a divine-level profession. Luo Sando began to look at Zhao Baiheng with a terrified gaze and told Jiang that she knew this damn dog. The epic sword he had in his hand had been stolen from her house. Jiang began to look at him with a calm gaze, and upon seeing that he was Zhao Baiheng, There was no longer any doubt in him that he was a prodigy, since his strength far surpassed that of Zhao Yunwu. The people did not know who was being attacked by the three together. In the middle of them there was a shirtless man with orange hair. He stood up, adopted an offensive stance, and prepared to attack. While the smoke curtain was disappearing, he clenched his fist tightly and decided it was time to counterattack. With a murderous look, he clenched his fist tightly and, using all his strength, gave a strong punch to the ground, breaking it into pieces. He was an invincible descendant. His name was Zhang Wuxiang. It was said that he had 3 professions and all were unique and hidden. He was strangely strong, since the 3 together could not defeat him. Lu Hengqiu and Luo Sando started to look at Wuxiang with a surprised gaze. Even Jiang himself was shocked, as Wuxiang was 3rd on the summer ranking list. He didn't know if his little insects would be able to face this guy. At that moment, Zhao Baiheng gathered momentum, jumped up, grabbed the sword with both hands and prepared to attack. Jiang looked up and, seeing this, thought it wasn't good. Zhao Baiheng landed on the ground, gripping the sword forcefully, causing the ground to start cracking. He was very close to Luo Sandao, but luckily Zhang grabbed her by the hip, jumped and dodged his attack. Zhao Baiheng started staring at Wuxiang with a serious look and praised him, since his wind fist was very powerful. Jiang started looking at Zhao Baiheng and caught his attention. Zhao Baiheng began to sheathe the sword, and upon seeing Jiang he was somewhat surprised. He had heard that he had been the one who killed Zhao Yuanwu. He drew his sword again, started pointing the tip towards Jiang, and while his body was surrounded by a powerful aura, he began to stare intently at Jiang, despite also despising the useless Zhao Yuanwu. Today Jiang was going to die. Originally he had planned to deal with Wuxiang first and then take care of an ant like Jiang, but since he was here, he decided to start with him. Jiang did not let himself be intimidated. He extended his hand to the side, releasing little 9 poisonous mists. With a look full of determination, he told him that although their strength was different, the Zhao family was really just as rotten in its core. Zhao Baiheng extended his sword to one side and began approaching Jiang. Seeing this, Jiang extended both hands to the sides and prepared to attack. Although he had promised Uncle Jie Gang not to show his power, now there was nothing else that could be done in this situation. Luo Sando, who was behind them, simply remained silent. Just before the combat could begin, someone launched a powerful slash towards them, which split the ground in 2. This person ordered everyone to step aside as the Grand Instructor known as the King of the Celestial Sword had arrived. Seeing this, both Jiang and Zhao Baiheng deactivated their powers. He began to look in the direction of the attack, and couldn't help but start wondering who the King of the Celestial Sword was. This instructor was the same person that Zhang had saved from the tree. He extended the sword towards them and with a serious look, explained that if anyone dared to cause trouble before the camp started, they would have to face his sword. Jiang began to look at the instructor and couldn't help but be shocked and start sweating. He couldn't believe that the strange old man he had encountered on the road was the chief called King of the Celestial Sword. With just one movement of his sword energy, he had made the 4 great geniuses tremble until they were immobile. He didn't know if his small insects had also been destroyed by his sword's shockwave. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, Zhai Gang crossed his arms and told Yu Xiao that he was leaving the rest in her hands. Upon hearing this, she responded with a understood. Then, she raised her hands towards the sky, causing a green energy to emanate and form a barrier. She turned her head to the side and explained to everyone that she had placed a protective barrier against espionage around the headquarters so that they could all speak freely without worrying about being spied on. Jiang simply stood still, began to look at her, and couldn't help but wonder what kind of power this was. In a matter of seconds, her power started expanding in all directions, causing the protective barrier to become increasingly larger. Zhai Gang approached Jiang, placed his hand on his shoulder, closed his eyes, and with a pleasant smile asked him if there was something he was hiding, adding that they were all here to help him. The others listened attentively in silence. Zhang lowered his head, began to touch his head with his hand, and with a sad look revealed to everyone that yesterday he had killed Jiao Wanwu from the Jiao family. Although he had completely eliminated the traces and the body of him, he wasn't sure if the Jaya family had other methods of investigation and tracking. Upon hearing this, everyone was shocked. Jiang began to look at Jiang with a terrified expression and asked him if he had really eliminated a member of the Jaya family. Jai Gang reached out his hand towards him, started looking at him with a surprised expression, and asked him if he had killed Jiao Yuanquan's grandson, the cultivator who was in the 8th stage of Zhengyu. Su Bailing couldn't help but be shocked and started wondering how strong Zhang was to have killed a member of the Jia family. Zhang, who was touching his head with his hand, upon seeing their expressions, thought that he had now caused problems for everyone. Jai Gang began to look at Jiang and explained to everyone that it was well known that the Jiao family had committed many evil acts. The young members of the Jia family had caused many problems in recent years. He couldn't help but praise him for doing good by protecting people. He crossed his arms and with a serious look, he remembered that the power of the 8th transformation was undoubtedly terrifying. But according to what he knew, his last grandson was Jiao Yuanwu, the most incompetent and least favorite of him. That being said, it was possible that old Jai Yuanquan would not personally intervene. Jane Tang, who had one hand on her waist, extended the other towards him and started looking at him with a determined gaze. She asked him not to worry because if the Jiao family sent someone, they the night watch would protect him since they were not weak. Jiang began to look at Jai Gang with a pleasant gaze and couldn't help but smile and feel happy. He was an orphan, and even though he had had neighbors who had helped him since he was little, this was the first time he felt like having a home. Jai Gang turned his back on him, started to walk away, slightly turned his head towards him, and thought that even if Jiao Yuanwu was useless, he probably had already reached the 2nd level of cultivation. He quickly approached Jiang, grabbed him by the shoulders, started looking into his eyes, and with a surprised look asked him how he had managed to kill someone of level 30 in the combat class being an awakened person of level 17 in the creation class. Jiang became somewhat nervous, started sweating, extended his hand towards him, and asked him not to get too excited because actually at that moment, someone had helped him. Upon hearing this, Jai Gang asked him who had helped him. Jiang put his hand behind his head, closed his eyes, and with a forced smile, he revealed that the 3rd daughter of the Lu family, who lived in Jiangnan, had been the person who had helped him. He also added that she had awakened a hidden defense class. Upon hearing this, everyone started looking at Jiang with a surprised look, and couldn't help but wonder if he was talking about Lu Sando, the daughter of the wealthiest merchant family in Jiangnan, the Lu family. Jai Gang approached Jiang, grabbed him by the shoulders again, started shaking him, closed his eyes and with a pleasant smile, praised him because even though the Lu family was not a family of warriors, it couldn't be denied that they were rich. So if someday Jiang found himself in trouble, then the Lu family wouldn't just stand idly by. He began to look at Jai Gang and couldn't help but sweat and wonder what he was doing. At that moment, Jiang's body began to emit a powerful purple energy. Several seconds later, once Jai Gang opened his eyes, he saw that Jiang's body was surrounded by a powerful energy. Quickly, he removed his hands from his shoulder, and upon seeing this, he couldn't help but be shocked. As sweat was dripping from his face, he began to look at him with a surprised expression, and remembered that Lu Sando had awakened the defense class, so she didn't have much attacking power, which meant that the person who had killed Yan Wu had been Jiang. Jiang extended his hand forward, and the poisonous mist of Little Nine appeared in his palm. He began to stare at it, revealing to everyone that he was actually an awakened person specialized in 2 classes. He revealed to everyone that his other hidden class was poison. Don Feng, who was standing behind him, started looking at him with a surprised expression, and couldn't help but be shocked and wonder what this power was. Jai Gang tried to shake Jiang's hand, asking him how many more secrets he had that he didn't know. But Jiang moved his hand aside because in the palm of his hand was the poisonous mist of Little Nine, and he explained that this was very poisonous, fearing that he wouldn't be able to resist it. The others stayed silent, observing this without interrupting. Just before Jiang could finish his sentence, Jai Gang approached him, shook his hand, then closed his eyes, and with a smile reassured him not to worry, because he knew how to defend himself well against poisons. Little Nine's poisonous mist gradually began to make contact with Jai Gang's hand. Jane Tang started to stare at their hands, and upon seeing this, she couldn't help but wonder what this strange poison was. Several seconds later, once Jai Gang stopped shaking his hand and pulled it back, he saw that his hand had already been poisoned. Upon seeing this, he realized that this was not good. Jiang put his hand on his shoulder, closed his eyes, and told him that this time he had gone too far. Gradually, the poisonous mist began to spread over his hand. He grabbed his wrist with the other hand, stared at Zhang aggressively, and asked him to stop talking nonsense since he hadn't even tried to defend himself against the poison from the beginning. Upon hearing this, Jane Tang, who was standing behind him, closed her eyes and started laughing. Meanwhile, on the other side, Chu Billing sat near Jai Gang's hand and began staring at it intently while wondering what this poison was. Quickly, Jai Gang turned his head back to where Jai Oki was and asked her to come quickly and help him get rid of the poison. Jai Oki, who had one hand extended to the side, deactivated the barrier, causing the energy to slowly disappear. She put her other hand near her mouth, closed her eyes, and while laughing she responded to him with a yes. Zhang reminded him again that he had told him that this poison was very strong. He sat on the couch, and while he had one hand resting on his knee, he extended the other where he had the poison to the side. Jai Oki approached him, closed her eyes, and with a smile she placed both hands near his hand and using her power, began to heal him. While she was healing him, he turned his head towards Zhang, closed his eyes, and with a forced smile told him that this poison was very good, adding that the more skills he had, the happier he would be. Chu Billing approached them, placed both hands on the arm of the sofa, started staring at Jiang and silently observed him. Several seconds later, once Jai Oki had completely healed his hand, with a serious look, he began to look at Zhang, and despite him being very talented, he advised him to forget about enrolling in the Tanjiao camp, since it was not good to enroll after what had happened with the Jiao family. Although the Tanjiao camp offered many valuable resources, it was most likely that the prodigy of the Jiao family would also participate, so they should not risk it for just a few resources. Jane Tang, who was standing behind him, put a hand on her waist, closed her eyes, and began nodding to indicate to him that Jai Gang was right. Zhang started looking at Jai Gang with a confused look, and asked what he meant by while he had his eyes closed. He explained to him that resources referred to the blood of fierce beasts, equipment, and other things. If one could be among the first, then they would also receive rewards such as mysterious fruits and secret realm scrolls. Upon hearing this, Zhang couldn't help but be shocked and wonder if what Jai Gang was saying was true. He began to imagine the insects and thought that those resources were much better than going out to hunt fierce beasts no one knew. Perhaps the insects could reproduce again at that moment. While his body was surrounded by the poisonous mist, he began to stare at Jai Gang with a serious look and asked him to let him enroll in the camp, as he was not afraid of danger. He had confidence and knew that he would be able to protect himself. Upon hearing this, Jai Gang asked him to wait as he needed to think about it. At the same time, somewhere on the west lake belonging to the Jiao family, there was a temple in the middle of the lake. Someone entered the water and using their power moved it aside, creating a large crack in the ground. This person started approaching the temple. This person was Jiao Jia Tanjiao's son named Jiao Beihan. Upon seeing how powerful he was, the others realized that he was the strongest genius in the Jiao family, and his combat power had reached a new level. As drops of the water from the lake fell like rain, Beihan, who held a sword with one hand, turned his head back and with a serious look, asked his subordinates to stop talking nonsense, and also asked if they had found what they were looking for. 3 men wearing hoods placed their hands on their abdomen, bowed their heads before him, closed their eyes, and one of them revealed to him that he had found out that the young master Yuan Wu had been pursuing a woman named Lu San Dao. He also added that she had been traveling with someone named Zhang Chen. Beihan slightly turned his head back, and with a serious look remembered that the girl from the Lu family was not from the combat class. He asked his subordinate who this guy called Zhang Chen was. The man revealed that Zhang Chen had awakened a creation class of divine rank. The last thing they knew was that he had gone to the Night Watch headquarters. One of the men placed a hand on his chest, bowed his head before him, closed his eyes, and revealed that they had discovered that he and Lu Sandao had enrolled in the camp. He also added that however these two people were only suspects and there was still no concrete evidence. Upon hearing this, Beihan couldn't help but smile. With a penetrating gaze, he began to look to the side, and thought that they were indeed suspects in this crime. A person who had awakened a creation class of divine rank was very interesting to him. Knowing that they had enrolled in the camp, he couldn't help but feel relieved as now he wouldn't have any need to make a special trip and search for them. After 3 days, he simply decided to kill them at the camp. At the same time, at the Night Watch headquarters, Ji Gang and Zhang went to his office and sat on the sofa. Ji Gang, who had one arm resting on his knee, extended his other hand to the side, began staring intently at Zhang and explained that even though he had already enrolled him in the Tanjiao camp, he was still very worried. He had already found a powerful ally among the people registered for him. This person was the little princess Mu Hankui from the Mu family, who had cultivation at the 7th level of transformation and was known as the Sealing Queen. Before going to camp, Zhang had to accompany her to explore a secret realm, in which he would not only be able to improve his level but also establish relationships with his companions in advance. Zhang, who was sitting in front of him with his elbows resting on the arms of the sofa, simply remained silently listening. Ji Gang approached him, took his hand, started looking at him and with a smile explained to him that he had heard that Mu Hankui was not only extremely beautiful but also the same age as him. She would be arriving soon, so he asked Zhang to use his charms to win her over. Upon hearing this, Zhang couldn't help but start sweating and become somewhat confused. He forced a smile at Ji Gang and replied that he was going to give it a try. At the same time, someone began knocking on the office door and Ji Gang gave them permission to enter. Mu Hankui and a man opened the door and began to enter inside. She rested her elbow on one hand, supported her head on the other hand, and started looking at Zhang. She told them that Ji Gang had asked her to accompany someone to a secret realm. The man put his hand behind his head, closed his eyes, and started smiling. She asked Ji Gang if he had changed his mind. Ji Gang told her that it was an honor for them to meet her in person. Mu Hankui crossed her arms and began to look at the ground, feeling somewhat confused. The man started touching his head and smiling. Seeing this, Zhang couldn't help but wonder what was happening. Both stood up. Ji Gang rested his arm on Zhang's shoulder, put the other one on his waist, started looking at her and explained that he hadn't answered them yesterday because he was angry with her grandfather. But today he was willing to accept this, but with a special condition. That condition was that she had to take Zhang Chen with her. Upon hearing this, Zhang's expression changed drastically. He couldn't help but be somewhat surprised and start wondering what was happening. Mu Hankui placed her hand on her hip and as she walked towards them, she told him that she had already given him the level 30 secret realm scroll. After saying this, she asked if he still wanted to impose more conditions. Ji Gang, who had his hand resting on Zhang's shoulder, told her that everyone had their own conditions. Upon hearing this, she thought that he was looking for someone reliable to level up with since Zhang couldn't enter a secret realm lower than level 50. She came to the conclusion that they were looking for her for this reason. The man put his arms behind his back and with a smile, he began to walk towards them in silence. She approached Zhang, started looking into his eyes and asked him what level he was and what class he had awakened. He began to look at her and with a calm voice, he explained that he was level 17 and had awakened the creation class. Upon hearing this, she placed a hand on her waist, started pointing at Zhang with the other hand, looked at him disdainfully, and upon seeing that he was a level 17 novice of the creation class, she called him trash. Zhang couldn't help but get angry and think that she was a spoiled brat. Ji Gang exploded with rage, clenched his fist tightly, and with a hateful look, he prepared to teach her a good lesson. He called her an empty-headed brat and asked her to show more respect since Zhang had awakened a hidden divine rank. Seeing this, the other man grabbed him by the hip, closed his eyes, and with a forced smile asked him to calm down, explaining that Mu Hankui's boyfriend had just left her and that's why she was behaving this way. She turned her head back, and upon seeing this, she couldn't help but start to feel scared. She thought that this time she had gone too far. Zhang turned his head towards Ji Gang, and upon seeing his attitude, he couldn't help but be somewhat surprised and confused at the same time. She became nervous, turned her body towards him, closed her eyes, extended her hands towards him, apologized to him and asked him to calm down. Zhang started touching his head with his hand and thought that this situation was strange. To the secret realm they were going to was called the Village of Light. It was level 30, and the entry requirements were that only a maximum of 5 people below level 50 could enter. The conditions to complete this secret realm were to eliminate all the monsters, kill the boss, or destroy the sacrifice altar. Several hours later they arrived at the portal. Dan Feng, who had one hand on his waist, turned his head towards them, and with a serious look asked everyone to listen carefully. This time he was going to be the leader. He asked everyone to remember that if they accidentally separated or found themselves in danger, then they should immediately return to this teleportation point. Although the probability of this secret realm becoming unstable was low, caution had to be taken in case of any eventuality. Everyone had to return here immediately and leave the secret realm. Mu Henkui, who had her arms crossed, began looking at him with a smile as she silently listened. Shu Bailing approached Zhang, reached out his hand towards the portal, closed his eyes, and with a smile told him that a level 30 secret realm scroll cost at least 1 billion. Jackie, who was holding on to her elbow with her other hand, also stayed silent listening. Mu Henkui, who had her arms crossed, turned her head back and started looking at Zhang. She called him a newbie and asked him not to start crying like a baby after entering the secret realm because it would only hold them back. Zhang simply started staring at her and remained silent. Everyone entered the portal. Shu Bailing turned his head back and with a smile, asked him not to worry as he would take care of protecting him. Zhang began walking towards the portal, and despite this secret realm being only level 30, he had a strange feeling. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, several minutes later, everyone entered the secret realm. Its interior was a green mountain full of trees and grass. In the middle, there was a mysterious village surrounded by snowy mountains. Everyone approached the summit, and Chu Bul, who was at the back of the group, thought that this village was truly beautiful. He also asked why they couldn't see any monsters. Jiang simply stood silently observing the beautiful village. Du Fei, who had his hand resting on his waist, began to look towards the village and explained to the others that it was likely that the monsters were hiding in the villagers' houses. He decided to search each one individually. Some time later, everyone descended from the mountain and arrived at the village. While they were walking, Du Fei asked the others not to worry and assigned Chu Bul the task of attracting the enemy's attention and facing them, while he himself would take care of dealing damage. Little Q would be in charge of healing, and Zhang Chen and Mu Hankui would follow behind them. He asked the two not to lag behind. Upon hearing this, everyone responded. Somewhere in the village, there was a rock on which was written the Shining World. Emitting a strong and evil aura, Du Fei, Zhao Qi, and Zhang approached the stone. Du Fei raised his hand to the sky, signaling them to stop. He realized that this stone was suspicious, so he asked them to be careful. Zhao Qi, who was standing beside him and holding the magical staff with both hands, explained that she disliked the atmosphere of this village a lot. She concluded that it had a dark nature. Zhang simply remained still and didn't say a single word. Zhao Qi decided to first apply a purification buff to the village. She closed her eyes, extended her hand towards the sky, and her hand began releasing blue magic. The buff she had applied started spreading throughout the entire village. Zhang brought his hand closer to his face, started looking at the magical dust, and with a surprised look thought that this buff was incredibly powerful since it not only cleared people's minds but also significantly increased their attributes and energy. At that moment, the wind started to blow and a cloud of smoke began to form. The sky changed color and turned red. The lights of the town turned on and an evil energy began to gather in the sky. They approached and couldn't help but be shocked and alert at the same time. This evil energy came from the stone. Duanfei quickly realized this and thought it was not good. He turned his head back and with a serious look, he ordered the others to run. Just before he could finish the sentence, the stone started absorbing him. Just before disappearing, he asked the others to stay away from the stone, and also gave them the order to call for reinforcements immediately since this was a mutation. A brilliant light descended to the ground just above the town, creating a magical barrier around it to prevent them from escaping. Several system windows appeared, warning everyone that this secret realm of level 30, called the Beautiful Town, had undergone a mutation and was now called the Village of the Dead. This secret realm was nightmare level, and the conditions to complete it were either to eliminate all the undead in the Village of Light or kill the final boss. The system left them a note: the light fades away, darkness flourishes, and that's when the door to the Kingdom of Death will finally open. The smoke dispersed everyone. Zhang was teleported inside a house. As he read the system information, he realized that the secret realm had just mutated directly from normal level to nightmare level, and the others had also been scattered by the mutation. He couldn't help but be shocked while a drop of sweat was falling from his cheek. He remembered that this secret realm was level 30 and had nightmare difficulty. With his current level, fighting alone would be too dangerous. He recalled what Duanfeng had told him: if one accidentally got separated and found themselves in danger, they should immediately return to the teleportation point. Zhang decided to listen to Duanfeng and decided to return first using the teleportation stone. Without hesitating for a second, he approached the wooden wall of the house and gave it a strong kick, breaking the wooden planks. But instead of finding the way out, he found himself in a room where there were lamps hanging from the ceiling, coffins on the floor, and on the wall there was a picture of an old man. Zhang entered the room and after looking carefully, he realized that there was no way out, only coffins. Upon seeing this, he couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. The old man in the photo began to look at Zhang and started to smile. He started to wonder if this was an illusion. He didn't know why the old man in the photo was smiling at him. At that moment, the lid of a coffin began to open, and someone with sharp claws started to emerge. Upon hearing the sound of the coffin lid, Zhang turned his body towards the noise and with a confused look, began to wonder what was happening. Several necromancers opened the coffins and emerged. They started staring at Zhang. According to the system, they were level 30 and had skills such as charge, decapitate, corrosion, among many others. Their main characteristic was that they were immune to normal physical attacks. The necromancers began to approach Zhang quickly and prepared to attack. Upon seeing this, he assumed an offensive stance, raised his hand, and his hand started releasing the poisonous mist of Little Nine. While he watched as the necromancers were getting closer little by little, with a serious look on his face, he thought that if normal physical attacks had no effect on them, it was better to use poison. Just before the necromancers could make a move, Zhang moved at an incredible speed, releasing the poisonous mist of Little Nine in the process. Within seconds, it began to spread throughout the room. After doing this, he left the house, took a leap, and landed on the roof of another house. In a matter of minutes, the necromancers came out of the house unharmed as if nothing had happened. He stood up, started staring at them intently and thought that indeed poison was also considered a physical attack, which didn't have much effect on necromancers. To deal with them, he needed to rely on the help of a mage. He had to find a way to meet Xiaoqi as soon as possible. While he was lost in his thoughts, Little Nine manifested herself. She clenched her fists and brought them close to her chest. She began to look at the necromancers with a hungry gaze, opened her mouth, and as drool was dripping from it, she asked him if she could devour them. Upon seeing that she had appeared and wanted to eat the necromancers, he couldn't help but be somewhat surprised. With a confused look, he asked her if she would be able to devour the necromancers. He also added that devouring was also considered a physical attack. The necromancers began to approach the house, while Little Nine's body was surrounded by a powerful aura. She started looking at them and explained to Jiang that she was going to be able to eat them. For her, they were delicious. Jiang started looking at the necromancers and gave her permission to go ahead and try eating them. But he also asked her not to push herself too hard. If she found herself in trouble, he would help her escape. Upon hearing this, she gathered momentum and with a murderous look, began to advance towards the necromancers, thinking that they were simply food. Jiang, who was standing on the roof, started to watch her and couldn't help but think that she was impressive. Just before the necromancers could make a move, Little Nine began to move at an incredible speed, piercing through their bodies, cutting them into pieces and devouring them in the process. She sat on the ground, pulled her knees together, placed her hands under her cheeks, closed her eyes and with a smile started to enjoy the meal and feel as if she were in heaven. To her, they were very delicious. Upon seeing this, Zhang couldn't help but be amazed. He began to look at her with a surprised expression and remembered that she came from the abyss, so essentially she was like an undead, both belonging to darkness. Now that he had the divine evolution, she could grow and become the mistress of the abyss, whose essence surpassed these necromancers completely. Upon remembering this, Jiang extended his hands towards the necromancers and at that moment, his body began to emit Little Nine's poisonous mist. He started looking at her and smiled because she was capable of devouring the necromancers. He decided it was time for the other insects to also come out and enjoy a good meal. Jiang's body began to emit a powerful energy, releasing the swarm of insects. He gave them all the order to separate, and also asked them to be careful not to be discovered by his companions. In the blink of an eye, thousands of insects emerged from his body and started attacking the necromancers. The insects began to attack and devour the necromancers. A system window appeared to inform him that his spiritual pets had killed 3 low-level necromancers, granting him 15 out of 21 points. Little Nine also started devouring them, obtaining 602 points. As the insects were slowly devouring the necromancers, another system window appeared and congratulated Zhang for leveling up. He went from level 17 to level 18, gaining 1 point in each attribute and 10 potential points. Zhang entered the house again, extended one hand to the side, clenched his other fist, started looking at it, and couldn't help but smile when he saw that this was too fast. In just a few seconds, he had obtained over 500,000 experience points and leveled up. He thought that this secret realm was simply a paradise tailored for him. Now that there were no necromancers in the house anymore, he turned his head back and decided to investigate the old man's strange photograph. Before, the old man was smiling, but now he was terrified and trembling with fear. Zhang approached the photo, put his hands on his waist, started looking at it, and with a smile asked the old man why he wasn't smiling. Little Nine manifested herself. She started looking at the photo and informed Zhang that everything outside had been eaten. He began to point at the photo with his thumb and with a smile he praised Little Nine for having done a good job. He asked her to look at the photo and also if she could devour it. Upon hearing this, she started looking at the photo with a hungry gaze. Seeing this, the old man became even more afraid and couldn't help but start trembling. At that moment, the old man's photo exploded into pieces, leaving them in shock. They couldn't help but wonder what was happening. A system window appeared. They had successfully scared off the level 35 Elite Death Guardian. As a reward, the system granted them 8701 experience points. The pieces of the photo fell to the ground. Zhang and Little Nine started looking at the pieces and felt a little depressed. At the same time, somewhere else in the village, someone hit a necromancer in the face with a bow. This person was none other than Duanfeng. Several necromancers surrounded him, but he drew his bow, held it with both hands, clenched his teeth tightly, and with a determined look began to swing it forcefully, hitting one of the necromancers in the process. Another necromancer tried to attack him by surprise, but he reacted in time and using the sharp string of the bow, he cut its hand. He couldn't help but feel fortunate since he had a long bow as a weapon. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to deal with these undead creatures. He began to worry about the others, especially Zhang Chen, who was not even level 30. If something really bad were to happen, he didn't know how he would explain it to his boss. While he was lost in his thoughts, a system window appeared in the sky to inform him that his teammate had killed a lower-level Spectre and an elite-ranked Guardian of level 35. As a reward, he obtained 1,261 points. Duanfeng lifted his head, started looking at the system window, and couldn't help but be shocked. He began to tremble and started questioning what was happening, and who was doing this. A horde of necromancers appeared and started chasing him. He grabbed the bow with one hand and began to flee. He clenched his teeth tightly and with a serious look, he remembered that this was a secret realm that had mutated. He didn't know who was killing so many monsters in seconds. He came to the conclusion that the responsible person could not be someone weak. At first, he thought it could be Chubilong, but then dismissed him since his physical attributes were very passive. Then he thought it could be Shaoqi, but dismissed her as well since she was a mage who could restrain necromancers but wouldn't be able to kill them in seconds. He immediately ruled out Zhang since he was low level. He had awakened the poison and growth class of all things, which would have no effect against the undead. With a surprised look, he began to look ahead and started questioning if the person who was killing the monsters was Muhankwai. He didn't know if she was that strong. The necromancers slowly started closing in on him. Seeing this, he began to run even faster. Now that there was someone on the team who could defeat the monsters instantly, he thought there was time to save the others. He asked Zhang to hold on a little longer. At the same time, in some other place in the village, someone put their hand on the wound they had on their shoulder. This person was very injured. She was none other than Muhankwai. Behind her there was a horde of necromancers who were chasing her. She was very injured, with scratches all over her body. While she was holding the wound on her arm with her hand, she opened her mouth and started bleeding. She was very desperate because she didn't want to die. She was the only one who had a hidden profession in her family. She still had to participate in the Young Talents camp and revitalize her family. Her hopes for life slowly began to fade away. Soon, she would run out of energy. She couldn't even use her primary ability, cult speed, properly. She started crying because she wanted to go home and didn't want to die. At that moment, she saw several necromancers running away, and upon seeing this, she began to question whether it was her teammate who had just killed the undead. She started walking even faster, and several seconds later she reached the end of the alley. At that moment, Little Nine's poisonous mist began to appear from around the corner. Upon seeing this powerful energy, she couldn't help but be somewhat surprised and feel relieved. Thinking that she was saved, she just had to hold on a little longer. But for her bad luck, her strength completely ran out, causing her to fall to the ground. While she had both arms supported on the floor, she closed her eyes and as blood was dripping from her mouth. She thought this wasn't good. The necromancers began to approach her and prepared to attack. Seeing this, she panicked, extended her hand forward, and with a desperate look started asking for help. At that moment, Zhang appeared and with a serious look, he began to stare at her. Upon seeing that the person from whom the necromancers were fleeing was Zhang, she couldn't help but be shocked. She started reaching out her hand towards him, and with a surprised look, she couldn't help but wonder what was happening and how it was possible for him to be so strong. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, the necromancers began to approach her and prepared to finish her off. With her last bit of strength, she reached out her hand towards Zhang and asked him to save her. Zhang turned his head towards her and with a serious look, he started to gaze at her and remained silent in deep thought. Several necromancers grabbed Muhankwai's arm, but at that moment, Zhang also grabbed her arm and asked her to flee. She began to look at his arm with a confused expression and couldn't help but wonder what was happening. Using all his strength, Zhang pushed Muhankwai aside and threw her backwards, saving her from the necromancer's attack. While he had one hand extended backwards, he stared intently at the necromancers and asked her to get away from here and stop interfering. She started running backwards and then suddenly she tripped and fell to the ground. Several seconds later, while she had one hand on the ground, she began to sit up, started wiping her face with the other hand. And while one eye was closed, she began to look at him with the other and thought that Zhang Chen was crazy. A purple energy appeared and upon seeing this, her expression changed drastically. She couldn't help but be shocked and started wondering what was happening. Zhang extended his hand towards the necromancers, releasing a swarm of insects that quickly advanced towards them and began attacking, tearing their bodies into pieces. Muhankwai, who was behind Zhang, couldn't help but think that he was very handsome. In an instant, the insects killed and completely devoured the necromancers. While Zhang's body was releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist, he simply remained silent. Mu Hangui placed both hands on the ground, sat down, started looking at Jiang, and couldn't help but wonder if he really was a useless person from the creation class. Jai Gang had told her that he had 2 classes, and she quickly realized that this was his true power. She put her hand over her mouth, started blushing, and looked at Jiang with a loving gaze. Her heart was beating very fast, which meant she was in love. 30 minutes later, the others finally got rid of the necromancers and gathered somewhere in the village. Chu Biling placed both hands on his knees, started breathing heavily, and couldn't help but think that necromancers were very powerful. Duan Feng began touching his head with his hand, and with a confused look thought that this was very strange since he hadn't come across another necromancer since he had left that house. Jai Oki, who was holding the magical staff with both hands, turned her head towards them and asked Duan Feng if it could be possible that Mu Hangui had the ability to control necromancers. They also didn't know if she had awakened any hidden class, which was very strange for her too. She started pointing to one side with her finger, and, with a surprised look, drew the attention of the others and informed them that there were traces of a fight, which meant that the battle had ended recently. Chu Biling began to look in the direction she was pointing and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. Duan Feng also started looking, but he was more concerned about Jiang as he didn't know if he was okay. Not far from them were some remains of the necromancers, covered by Little Nine's poisonous mist. They approached the area, and Jai Oki, who was holding the magical staff with one hand, stood there speechless upon seeing that these were indeed remnants of the necromancers. Duan Feng couldn't help but panic. He asked the others to quickly search for Jiang, as if something were to happen to him, none of them would be able to take the responsibility. After this, the 3 dispersed throughout the village and began searching for Jiang. Several minutes later, they started following the traces and turned a corner. Upon seeing what was in front of them, they couldn't help but be shocked. Duan Feng was in shock. He couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Jai Oki was somewhat surprised and began to wonder what was happening. In front of them there was a street with small stairs, and on these stairs sat Jiang, who had both elbows resting on his knees and his head supported on his hand. Beside him was Mu Hangui. She clenched her fists tightly, sat behind him, and started massaging his back. Near them on the ground, there were more remains of necromancers. Chubiula, who was behind them, asked Duan Feng if that was Jiang. Jai Oki began pointing to the sky with her finger with a surprised look, told him that it was indeed Jiang. Duan Feng started looking at Jiang with a confused expression, and asked the others not to move because this was too strange. He didn't understand how the granddaughter of a king could be giving back messages to Jiang Chen, as if she were a servant. He came to the conclusion that these 2 were probably illusions created by the boss of this secret realm. Mu Hangui clenched her fists, stood behind Jiang, and started giving him a massage. Both of them looked ahead and saw Duan Feng and the others. Upon seeing that they had arrived, Jiang stood up, pointed to one side with his thumb, and explained to them that the boss was in the backyard of the village. Far from feeling relieved, they adopted an offensive stance. Duan Feng took out his bow and with a serious look ordered them not to move. Chu Bila clenched both fists and prepared to attack. Jai Oki tightly held the magical staff, stared at Jiang, and asked him to answer the question they were going to ask first. Upon hearing this, Jiang and Mu Hangui couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. She stood up, positioned herself in front of him, extended her hands to the sides, looked at them with a serious gaze, and told them that if they wanted to harm Jiang, then they would have to step over her dead body first. He began to look at her with a confused look, and couldn't help but wonder what she was doing and why she was behaving this way. Jiang put his hand on her face, pushed her aside, stood in front of her, closed his eyes, placed the other hand on his chest, and with a smile explained to Duan Feng that he knew what they were thinking. He revealed to everyone that he wasn't any monster. He just had a little more charm. They didn't respond, and upon seeing this, he told them that their boss was named Jai Gang and Aunt Tang cooked very well. Jai Oki approached him, placed both hands on his chest, and asked if he was injured. He started touching his head with his hand, closed his eyes and began to smile. Su Bulin couldn't help but feel relieved to see that he really was Zhang and wasn't hurt. On the other hand, Duanfeng remained somewhat confused. Mu Hongwei, who was hiding behind Zhang, grabbed his cloak with one hand and, while blushing like a tomato, asked the others not to be angry with her, because she was just being obedient. Zhang turned his head towards her, and with an angry look asked her to tell the truth and stop lying. Upon hearing this, Jai Oki was somewhat surprised as she did not expect this from him. Duanfeng began to smile and thought that he really had the skills to conquer women. Shu Bulin also started to smile and thought that he was hopeless. Zhang began to feel overwhelmed and with a shout, told them that it was enough already. He also asked if they didn't want to defeat the boss. In response, the others started to smile and change the subject by saying yes. Sometime later, they arrived at the backyard of the village. With a determined look, Zhang gave a strong kick to the door, while the others simply remained silent. They opened the door and started entering the backyard. In front of them stood the boss of this secret realm, who was giant and had a murderous gaze. It slightly lowered its head and began staring fixedly at Zhang. A system window appeared and informed everyone that this boss was called the God of the Undead, had a boss rank, and was level 40. Zhang raised his head and began to stare at the boss, silently contemplating. Everyone started looking at the boss and couldn't help but be shocked. With a serious and determined look, Duanfeng revealed to them that this was the level 40 boss. He also asked them to be careful as he would attract its attention first. He assigned Mu Henku with the task of protecting Zhang. He also asked Jai Oki not to forget to use the buff and advised her to be careful with the boss's attacks. They couldn't be reckless. They had to try to ensure their own safety while attacking. They had to be very careful because this was no game. The boss simply started looking at them and remained silent, and several seconds later it began to move. Seeing this, Duanfeng asked the others to be careful as it was moving, and also ordered them to separate. But to everyone's surprise, instead of attacking, the boss crouched down, rested its elbow on the ground, and prostrated itself before them, leaving everyone in shock. The boss's body began to tremble. Duanfeng was dumbfounded, and with a surprised look he started wondering what was happening. Su Bailing was also astonished. He was surprised because he didn't know why the boss was begging for forgiveness. Zhang took a step forward, extended his hand towards the boss, and his body began to emit little Nine's poisonous mist. They were all injured, so he decided to take care of the boss. He knew this was a good opportunity. So he called Little Nine and told her it was time to eat. In the blink of an eye, Little Nine manifested in the form of the insect mother. She opened her mouth and prepared to devour the boss. It lifted its head, looked to one side, and upon seeing this, it couldn't help but be shocked. Little Nine began to devour the boss while Zhang simply remained silent and started smiling. Several system windows appeared. He had killed the boss called God of the Undead, and as a reward the system granted him 76, 60, 90 experience points. Little Nine also transferred her 31, 224 experience points to him. Thanks to the experience points he went from level 25 to level 26. Each of his attribute points improved, and he also obtained 10 potential points. In the blink of an eye she completely devoured the boss, and her poisonous mist began to return to Zhang's body. Another system window appeared and congratulated everyone for defeating the boss and completing the secret realm called Village of the Undead. The system started calculating the reward. Seeing that Zhang had defeated the boss, Duanfeng and the others quickly realized that he had also instantly killed all the necromancers in the village. Zhang put his hand behind his head, closed his eyes, and with a forced smile, he explained to them that it had been a coincidence that his poison could eliminate the necromancers. The system finished calculating the rewards and a mission status window appeared. Donfeng, who was level 49, received a C rank evaluation. Shu Bul, also level 49, received a D rank evaluation. Xiaoqi, who was level 46, received a D rank evaluation. Mu Hankui, who was level 36, received an E rank evaluation. And finally Zhang, who was level 26, received a SSS rank evaluation. A medal appeared in the sky, and upon seeing it, everyone was surprised. They had successfully cleared the secret realm called Village of the Undead, which was level 30, and had a nightmare difficulty. The system evaluation was SSS rank. As a reward, the system granted them the Dead Soul Medal, a special item that could be equipped and withstand one deadly attack. It was an item already bound to them and couldn't be transferred or sold. Duanfeng couldn't help but be amazed as the individual reward items were already quite good. And now they had also obtained a very advanced item. They had never before received rewards like these, all thanks to following Jiang. They had won without doing anything. They approached Jiang, put their hands on their knees, bowed their heads to him and thanked him. He put his hand behind his head and started laughing. Jiang, who had been the best, obtained many rewards. Among them were 2 books, a metal glove, a scroll, a crystal, a scythe, a necklace, a ring, and a shield. He crossed his arms, and while looking at the items, he thought it was no wonder that this was a level 30 secret realm. The death rate was too high. He quickly came to the conclusion that these items must be worth billions. Among the items there was one item that caught his attention quite strongly. This item was called Invisibility Cape. It was of platinum quality and could grant 80 agility points and 50 energy points to the user. By using this cape, one could become invisible for 3 minutes with a cooldown time of 2 hours. Jiang extended his hand towards the invisibility cape, and with a surprised look, he decided to keep it. For him, this cape was practical, useful, and fashionable. The other items were not going to be of much use to him, so he decided to sell them when he returned and buy pure blood for the insects. A portal appeared in the sky, along with a system window. Due to the mutation in the secret realm, and having completed the challenge, this secret realm was about to disappear, so the system asked everyone to leave as soon as possible. This time the devour value had increased a lot, so if the insects drank a little more blood, they would be able to reproduce for a second time. Night fell, and they went back to the Night's Watch headquarters. They informed Jai Gang that the secret realm had mutated. Jiang had conquered Mu Hongui, and he was also the one who had cleaned up the secret realm. Upon hearing this, Jai Gang couldn't help but be shocked. He asked everyone to leave the office as he wanted to speak alone with Jiang. Duanfeng, who was standing behind Jiang, responded with an understood. Several minutes later, when everyone left, Jiang entered the office. Jai Gang turned his body towards him, and with a serious look asked him to confess and be honest, as this way he would be treated leniently. But if he resisted, then he would be severely punished. Jiang became somewhat confused, and with a trembling voice, he asked him what he meant by being honest. Jai Gang started staring into Jiang's eyes. He had told the others that the Venom class could counteract necromancers, but Jai Gang knew this was just an excuse to deceive Duanfeng and the others. He knew that Jiang was pulling his leg. While Jai Gang's eyes were shining, with a sinister look he asked Jiang to tell the truth and also asked him what he was hiding. He began to look at him with a confused gaze and couldn't help but wonder what was happening. He started sweating, and Little Nine manifested in his consciousness. She was also terrified. He didn't know if the insects were about to be discovered. They were an ancient celestial plague, and if people found out about their existence, he didn't know if they would forgive him. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part. Jai Gang approached him, and with a sinister look asked him to speak. Seeing his expression, Jiang couldn't help but feel afraid and began to tremble. With a trembling voice he tried to explain to him what had happened. Seeing that Jiang was very scared, Jai Gang calmed down and started to smile. He approached him, and while he had one hand on his hip, he placed the other on his shoulder, closed his eyes, and began laughing out loud upon seeing that he also became nervous. He didn't know where his courage had gone when he had killed the monsters in the secret realm. Jiang started sweating like crazy. He began to look at Jai Gang, and it didn't take long for him to realize that he was pulling his leg. He sat on the sofa, and while he had one arm resting on it, he extended the other hand towards the ceiling, and with a calm look explained that he wasn't pulling his leg. It was just that if he didn't want to talk now, then he also didn't want to keep pressuring him. The more cards up his sleeve Jiang had, the happier Jai Gang would be. In the future, Night Watch would count on him to achieve new successes. Jiang finally calmed down, put his hand on his chest, and with a sincere smile asked him not to worry. He decided not to reveal anything for now, but in return he was going to get him epic-level equipment. Uncle Jai Gang closed his eyes and couldn't help but start laughing. He appreciated Jiang's intention, but an epic-level piece of equipment wasn't easy to obtain. In response, Jiang explained that he was serious. Jia Gang decided that it was time to get serious. He reached out towards the ceiling, causing a magic circle to start appearing. With a serious look, he thought it was good that Jiang had an ace up his sleeve. But there were some things he needed to clarify. From within the magic circle emerged 3 bandaged corpses, and they fell to the ground in front of Jiang. Seeing this, he couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. He asked Uncle Jia Gang what this was and where these corpses had come from. Jia Gang started to stare at Jiang and revealed to him that these guys were at least 3rd-grade masters of level 60 or higher. There were even 2 4th-grade grandmasters with a level above 90. They were not people to be taken lightly, since any one of them was someone whom even Jia Gang could not handle. He was just a corpse collector. Jiang became somewhat nervous, and as a drop of sweat was falling from his cheek, he began to look at the corpses, and with a terrified look asked Jia Gang if all these guys wanted to kill him. With a calm look, Jia Gang asked him to stop talking nonsense, as these guys had gone to kill Mu Hankyu, but they had all been secretly eliminated by her protectors. Jiang turned towards him and with a confused look asked why these guys wanted to murder Mu Hankyu. In response, he took out a scroll and while holding it in his hand, asked him to read the content. Jiang took the scroll with both hands, opened it, and began to read. This scroll was a great summer hunting classification. The first on the list was someone of level 46 named Ying Zhan, an invincible descendant who was in the war zone of the capital. Killing him would grant celestial rewards. The second on the list was someone of level 46 named Jie Xuanyu, an invincible descendant, who was in the Madu war zone called Shanghai. Killing him would grant 3 celestial rewards. The third on the list was someone of level 45 named Zhang Wushuang, an invincible descendant. He was in the war zone south of the Yangtze River called Jiangnan. Killing him would grant 3 celestial rewards. The 12th on the list was someone of level 41 named Xiao Baihan, a national defender descendant. He was in the war zone south of the Yangtze River called Jiangnan. Killing him would grant 2 celestial rewards. Jiang did not know what this great summer hunting list was. All were names he had not heard before. Looking a little more closely, he noticed the name Xiao Baihan. With a surprised look, he asked Jia Zhang if this was not a member of the Xiao family that protected the country. He began to look at Zhang with a serious expression and responded that yes, all of them were the most outstanding geniuses of his generation's camp, and Xiao Baihan was one of them. He was also going to participate in the Tianzhou camp of the 8 war zones, and Xiao Baihan was going to be with Jiang in the Yangtze River Southern War Zone. With a serious look, Jia Jiang explained to him that if one was in the 7th transformation, they were considered as King Protector. If one was in the 8th transformation, they were considered as Country Protector. And if one was in the 9th transformation, they were considered Invincible. The top 100 prodigies of Great Xia were at least descendants of sealed kings. Mu Hengyu, being one of the 12 descendants of sealed kings in Jiangnan, had only been able to occupy position 77. On the scroll, there was also information about her. She was ranked number 77, a descendant of the sealed king, and she was in the Jiangnan war zone. Killing her would grant a celestial level reward. Jia Jiang began to look at Jiang and explained that if the descendants were powerful, then much more so would be the Zhao family that ruled the country. Several minutes later, Jiang finished reading the entire scroll, approached Jia Jiang and returned it to him. With a serious look, he asked if he had shown this to him, so that he wouldn't be too unprepared in the Tianzhou camp. He took the scroll with his hand and replied yes. The greater the power he displayed, the more dangers he would expose himself to. He asked Jiang not to expose himself recklessly unless absolutely necessary. He clenched his fist tightly, started looking at the ground with a lost gaze, and explained that the other geniuses had the backing of great powers. But his uncle Jia Jiang, although he had a good master, had not learned the arts well and so far was only a 3rd-level master. He feared he might not be able to protect Jiang adequately. He began to walk and told Jia Jiang that he would take this into account, and would try not to reveal his power to anyone in the Tianzhou camp. He started looking at the ground again, and thought that Uncle Jia Jiang not only did not blame him for hiding his power, but was also making great efforts to protect him. He put his hand under his chin, and with a smile, he remembered that they said Zhang's performance in the secret realm had been better than the others. If this got out, then he would definitely be above Mu Hankyu in the rankings. But there was something strange. She hadn't said a single word to anyone since she returned and was keeping his secret. He stood up, and while keeping his hand under his chin, approached Zhang. He started looking into his eyes with an insinuating look and with a smile asked him to be honest. He asked what he had done to Mu Hankyu. He recalled that in the secret realm there were only necromancers. He thought Zhang's tastes were really strange. Upon hearing this, Zhang began to look at Jai Zhang with a confused expression and couldn't help but start sweating. To stop talking about the subject, he quickly turned his back on him, and as he was walking away, he started waving goodbye with his hand and explained that he was going to take a shower and then sleep because he wanted to rest a bit. With a confused look, Jai Zhang told him that he had not said this was a bad thing. Several hours later, it began to get dark, and Zhang returned to his apartment. In front of him was a table with a bunch of jars. He placed both hands on the table and with a joyful look started to gaze at the jars. He had bought 33 units of 3rd level blood and 14 units of 4th level blood. He had sold most of the equipment to get this. This should be enough for the insects to reproduce in the 2nd generation. He took a jar, removed the lid, began to pour the purple blood on his arm, and with a smile asked the little insects to come out as it was time to eat. He decided to start first with the refined 3rd level blood. This was equivalent to devouring a master of 3 human transformations with a level above 60. To extract just one jar required hundreds of ferocious beasts. He told the insects that their father had made a great effort for this. Little Nine didn't take long to smell the scent of blood. She manifested herself, climbed onto Zhang's head, started looking at his arm with a hungry gaze and explained to him that she also wanted to eat. While the blood was floating around his arm, he began to look at Little Nine with a cheerful look and asked her not to eat now as it was still a long way before she could reproduce. Upon hearing this, she became sad, grabbed Zhang's hair with both hands, closed her eyes and started crying like a little girl. Seeing this, he couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. He grabbed her with his hand, lowered her from his head and threw her on the table on top of a jar. He closed his eyes and although at first he didn't want to, in the end he also let her eat. She grabbed the lid off the jar and with a hungry look, thanked him saying that he was the best. She removed the lid from the jar, put a straw inside it and started drinking. She was level 18 and was in the process of leveling up to 19. While she was drinking, Zhang grabbed another jar of blood, removed the cap and began pouring the blood into his arm again. This was level 4 blood, equivalent to a great human master of level 90 or higher. Upon smelling the blood, the insects emerged from his body and began to drink the blood. A system window appeared and informed him that the reproduction process of 9 miasma wings insect larvae had begun. Each insect could reproduce a total of between 40 and 60 larvae. The divine evolutionary acceleration was in progress. More insects came out of his body and started to drink the blood, and several minutes later another system window appeared to inform him that the insect reproduction process had been completed. Now there was a total of 100,000 offspring. At that moment, Jiang's hand began to release Little Nine's poisonous mist which was made of insects. He started looking at his hand and upon seeing this, he couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. With a surprised look, he went on alert and began to wonder what was happening. Several seconds later, the insect larvae began to emerge through his hand. He grabbed his hand to prevent the insects from coming out, but it was in vain. The 100,000 insect larvae emerged and started flying around his apartment, devouring everything in their path. Zhang began to look at the ceiling and upon seeing this, he couldn't help but panic and thought that the insects were rebelling. He clenched his fist tightly, extended it towards the ceiling, gritted his teeth forcefully, and gave the order to all the insects to return to the insect nest and stay still as he had not asked them to come out. The insects began entering his arm and started returning to the insect nest. When looking to one side, he saw that the insects had begun devouring everything. They had devoured the painting and part of the table. He did not take long to realize that the insects were terrifying, and it was dangerous to let them out while at home since they were capable of destroying it. On the table lay little Nine. She was licking a jar of blood and enjoying every drop, with an angry look. Jiang scolded her for thinking only about eating instead of taking care of her mischievous offspring. He turned his head to the side and his statistics window appeared. Currently, he was level 26, had the identity of Sovereign of Insects, had the profession of Divine Rank Creation, and his talents were Growth of All Things level 1, Divine Evolution level 1, and Ancestral Tree. Little Nine's statistics window also appeared. She was a level 21 insect mother, or also known as 9 Wings of Miasma. She was disaster level. She had an offspring count of 100,000 units and her combat power evaluation was 197 stars. Upon seeing that she had a combat power of 197 stars, Jiang couldn't help but feel joyful and start to smile. This had improved too quickly. She was almost at the level of a third-level master. While his body was surrounded by powerful energy, he clenched his fist tightly and thought that everything was ready. Now it only remained to wait and go to the Tianjiao camp tomorrow, reach level 30 all at once, and complete Little Nine's second reproduction. Jiang started to imagine the sexy Little Nine, and with a joyful look he thought that at that moment, he was going to be able to obtain a new mother insect. At the same time, Jane Tang returned to the headquarters of the Night's Watch. With a surprised look she asked Jai Gang if he wanted her to seek out Tian Dao Wang for him to intervene. She didn't know if it was necessary to make such a fuss over Zhang Chen's matter. Jai Gang was sitting in front of her on the sofa, while he had one hand resting on the arm of the sofa. He put the other under his chin and explained to her that he was doing this just in case. He knew that in the war zone south of the river, Jiang would meet with the prodigy of the Zhao family, Zhao Bihan. The most dangerous thing was that there were no secrets that could be hidden in Tianzhao camp. He started looking at the floor, and with a sincere look explained to her that there was something in Zhang that terrified him. He was worried about Zhang's poison. He knew he was hiding many secrets from them. With a serious look, she began to stare at Jai Gang. She couldn't believe that this was possible and also asked him not to scare her. She began to remember what had happened a long time ago. 600 years ago the Devourer caused disturbances and Great Zia created the forbidden professions. Once discovered, users of forbidden professions were eliminated directly. She stood up and with a look full of terror, she explained to him that if Zhang Chen really had a forbidden profession, then it would be revealed at the moment of awakening. She believed that Jai Gang was just being paranoid. Jai Gang clasped his hand with the other hand, started looking at the ground with a look full of terror, and thought that he hoped it was as she was saying, that only he was being paranoid. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,